Hi, and welcome to the Sustainable Energy for All Forum. And the topic of this panel discussion is going to be around the whole issue of energy efficiency and how we can do a lot more with less if we take on board energy efficiency ideas. It's often called the first fuel, and that's something that the panelists here know quite a lot about. So I will introduce who we have with us, but then ask each of you, if that's okay, just to say anything more about yourself and your interest in the issue. So starting with my left, we have John Holland, who is president of the International Copper Association. So John, do you want to start us off with a few words about yourself and your interest in the issue?
Obviously, I represent the global copper industry, and our interest in energy efficiency is obviously, with copper being the most efficient conductor, things with copper in it are more efficient, whether they're appliances, motors, refrigerators, air conditioners. So we use the term, instead of the first fuel, the megawatt, meaning no watt. That's the best watt of all in terms of what efficiency can mean for us. So that's my interest, and it's important, I think, both from an efficiency standpoint, but climate mitigation as well.
Thanks, John. We'll come back to some of those ideas and issues in a moment. Fleming, Voetmann, on my right, is head of public affairs at Danfoss. So Fleming, do you want to say anything?
Sure, thank you so much. So at Danfoss, we work with energy efficiency across a number of different sectors. So we work with mobile hydraulic for big machineries, off-road machines. Heavy-duty vehicles, we work with motor systems and industrial automation. And then we work a lot with buildings, so heating, ventilation, air conditioning in buildings. We work a lot with cooling of food and other things, so refrigeration, cold storage, cooling of data centers, and so on and so on. And then we have a small stake also in wind and solar.
All good uses of copper.
Yes.
So we have a marriage made in heaven already.
Absolutely.
But it's finally turn to Thierry Van Landegem from VP Innovation at Alcatel. Lucent? I should go.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Forgive me
Correct.
if that was mispronounced. Thierry, you want to say anything more about your
Sheila.
interest?
Yes. So Alcatel Lucent is a vendor of communications equipment. So if we talk about the internet works with something, and the systems are, amongst others, built by Alcatel Lucent. Now, I'm here also as the chairman of Green Touch, and Green Touch is a consortium set up by Bell Labs throughout the information and communications industry. So it complies with vendors of communication systems, but also the users, the service operators, the AT&T and Verizon of this world, as well as universities. And the consortium has set a very ambitious goal to improve energy efficiency in communication network. Because as you know, we're all using smartphones, tablets, laptops. You get all the Internet of Things connected. So traffic is usually increasing. So you need to increase these communication networks as well. And therefore, more energy is needed. So we want to make it more efficient.
Thank you. I realise I've been extremely gentlemanly for a woman on the panel and not introduced myself. And let everyone else go first. So I'm Sheila Watson. I'm from FIA Foundation. FIA Foundation is a UK-based charity which focuses on issues around safe and sustainable mobility. So my interest in the issue of efficiency is very much around vehicle efficiency. So our hugely growing numbers of cars on the planet, expected by 2050 are tripling, most in the developing world, and yet we don't have vehicles that have the latest technologies in them yet. And so one of the things we're working very hard on is to promote the use of existing cost-effective technologies within internal combustion engines. Now it's only one part of the piece. There's so much more that needs to happen on transport, but transport is a huge contributor to climate issues. And I think efficiency can deliver so much that goes really beyond just the climate. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, John. I think that one of the things about efficiency is it does touch on so many co-benefits, as the terminology goes.
No, I agree, particularly on automobiles, although the biggest kick, even though you're more oriented to the internal combustion engine, is the transition, probably more led by China, is the electric vehicle. And the efficiency, and also the climate mitigation. The big challenge is for all people to buy one is how far can I go before I have to hit a charging station. But again, the things we're learning from that technology is driving big improvements in motor efficiency too. So I think, certainly from a climate mitigation, reducing greenhouse gases, but there are a lot of things technology-wise in cars today that you go back 5 or 10 years ago that have dramatically reduced the amount of pollution from vehicles, mainly from vehicles.
But I think the automotive industry is always a good point of departure, because if I look at my car, and I live in Europe, and of course we've had all kinds of policies to regulate the mileage, the efficiency of the car, and so on. And in all of those years, we've only gotten better cars. So I think that's a key thing to remember, is it doesn't mean that we have to compromise on the comfort of the car, the luxury, whatever in the car. Actually, we have far better cars today. They are way more efficient than they were 5-10 years ago. And they come with more technology, more things. So I think is a key thing that people have learned in the European Union, the key thing people learned, of course, in the United States, that it's not an either or, actually, alongside efficiency and so on. We get low cost every day when we drive our car, but we also have better cars. And I think, for me, I think, that's the same thing we've seen also in the last 10 years with household appliances, refrigerators, with our laptop computers. They use fraction of the energy they did just 10, 20 years ago, and they're still better. So I think that's the key thing. We don't need to compromise our lifestyle and our comfort. We can have an excellent lifestyle and nice comfort and a lot of other things, and at the same time save energy. And I think that's a key thing to share with our people out there who might be concerned that if we talk about global warming, CO2, whatever, it means that we have to say no thanks to that. It doesn't have to be. Right?
I agree, and you can make the comparison with other industries as well, right? Because I remember in our industry, say 10 plus years ago, the industry was focused on making everything better, faster, and cheaper, right? Because I, as a user, you as a user, you wanted to, with your smartphone, to download video movies faster and faster. And the energy part of it, of the equation, was something like at the back of the chain of priority, right? Whilst now we see that energy becomes part of the equation, right? And so when you work on energy efficiency, you also have to bring value, create value. So better quality of service, improved quality, etc. So it's the same as your example for be it the airco or the car or even the appliance industry, whatever. It's always adding value to be more efficient, right? And if I look at communications industry as a whole, we see this strong increase in traffic. Still, we're working on reducing the energy efficiency, or reducing the energy consumption in these networks, but still able to carry much more traffic. So you would imagine that at least I could support as much traffic as I used to. No, I can even support more traffic. And so I reduce energy consumption really wants to do with my equation, and including energy.
I think that's right. I mean, I do have concerns, though, sometimes that perhaps we all feel a little complacent to that extent to which, because we've experienced energy efficiency in vehicles is my best reference point within the European Union or North America. And actually, it's only latterly the improvements in efficiency have gone into real savings of energy. Before that, they went into power. So the cars were much more powerful, so still used a lot of fuel. And actually, it's in the developing world, it's in the less developed countries. For me, with vehicles, where the growth is coming, and where, when you look at fuel efficiency now, it's going in one direction. And so the amount of energy that's being thrown away, the issues of energy security, which are going to rear up and cause problems, and all of these countries are aware of that. Pollution, air quality, early deaths from poor air quality, these are all related. They're all very important issues which people see as being development issues or economic issues. But energy efficiency has part in all of those conversations.
To me, it's essential, and you look at the goal of reducing energy consumption by 2030 by 10%. Well, how do we do that? And really, the only way I see it from using the existing structures that are in place is efficiency. It's no other simple solution. I think we were talking earlier about the fact we've worked with up to 40 countries, putting in place minimum energy performance standards, and we use the term MEPS. But there are most of the issues, as you point out, Sheila, are in the developing world, where if we go from 2 billion middle class to supposedly 5 billion, according to the Brookings Institute, they're going to want air conditioners, they're going to want refrigerators, things that we, as you mentioned, one of the conveniences of life, and where's the power going to come from? It's an enormous challenge. So if we could just simply improve efficiency, we can meet that demand and avoid a lot of investment in primarily fossil fuel power plants. We say if you can get the 10% improvement in efficiency, our technical engineers and stuff would talk about so many thousands of terawatts and gigatons of CO2, but for the average person, they think of the term gigaton. What does that mean? But putting it in lay terms, it's taking 500 million cars off the road, which is half of the current day car stock. I don't know, the way things are going in China, it's going to go up, but still that's huge. When you think about taking that and coming up through efficiency, just through efficiency.
But I think the point you make about the projects being just as good when they're efficient is an important one.
And better, really better.
And often better, because we did a piece of research not long ago at the foundation that I work for, and we used a very different approach. We used some behavioural people who used to looking at how you sell things to people, and they went to China and they spoke to some young people, and I won't disguise, I was rather hopeful that rather like the rest of the world, where young people are into their IT and their texting, and they don't want a car because they can't do both at once, that this might be the case in China. But tragically, for the planet, for everyone really concerned, it's not the case. And the desire to own a car, and a big car, is extraordinary. The people who did this work said to them it put them in mind of 1950s America, which I think is a very clear image, isn't it? It's an image of acquisition and growth and sales. So how do we address that, consumer desires? What do you...
Yeah, no, I agree. I was born and raised in Europe, and I think the American way of living was somewhat the goal, right? And I think now we see that goal moving into Asia, where you want to live as the Western world, right? But it becomes a huge problem, actually. If I look at the communications industry, we were at the panel this morning and heard the person from a service provider saying that, I want to set up my cell towers to provide basic cellular communication infrastructure, but there is no electricity. So he has to put in place diesel generators, right? Yeah. So if you look at what we in Green Touch do, is define new technologies and architectures in order to improve energy efficiency. So if you can improve that efficiency, and we can do that, we have new technologies, we invented new technologies, and so on and so forth, you come to a point where the requirement of energy is so small that you can use renewable energies. So instead of having a cell tower with a huge, infeasible, impossible solar panel, you now come with your solar cell tower, and you put the small solar panel, and you have a contained system, right? If I can put communication infrastructure, just drop it and then forget about it, and it's deployed, that's the way to go. Because I will use less energy, I will be more efficient, and I will serve many, many more people.
But I fully subscribe that a lot for the emerging markets, I think we all need to ensure that they get the best available technology. Because of course, whether you are in India, you're in China, in Indonesia, it doesn't really matter, or in Latin America and so on, you don't want, in 2015, you don't want to buy something that has the quality and the efficiency of something that people in the United States were using in the mid-80s. I mean, that is, to be perfectly blunt, not a very rational choice to have something that is a 25-year-old technology in terms of efficiency and so on. So you want to make sure, if you are in Indonesia, if you are in China, that you get the best available technology from day one. That's going to save you money in the next 25 years. I think that is crucial. But I also still think that, because now we're sitting in New York, and I always find it fascinating to check into a hotel here on Manhattan. This time, the place I like to stay was so loud, so I stay at a newly built hotel. It's newly built, right? So you can say, wow, that's got to be very efficient.
Yeah.
And to my big surprise, there's a refrigerator in there.
Yeah.
With nothing in it. Yeah. Somebody moved the minibar, doesn't exist, but the refrigerator is still there. It's running all the time. So I switch it off. Because I guess the next guest who comes who wants to use the refrigerator can probably turn it on. That took me less than 1 second, but it's running 24/7. And where's the hotel manager in that, right? The aircon system runs 24/7. Doesn't notice whether I'm in the room or not in the room. But had you applied an intelligent room control, it would know, is the guest in the room? Fine, we have the aircon up and running. Now the guest there for his business or whatever, sightseeing, shopping, we don't have the aircon. I mean, that's simple technology that they didn't even use in completely built hotel. And of course, I need to say that to the hotel manager before I check out.
Absolutely.
But it's just to say that even here in the US and even in Europe, so there's still a lot of things we can do at the same time. I mean, we have done enormous progress in the past 30, 40 years, but we still have a long way to go. And again, the good news is that we will only have better living, we will only save a lot of money. And I think so that's the good thing, but there's still a lot of things we can do.
I think some context you might provide too for the people watching is why buildings matter. It's 40 to 45% of energy consumption, roughly in that range, is tied up in building and building systems. So it does matter. And it's interesting because having just come back from China in Beijing, when you check into the hotels, you put your card in that slot, and then the lights and everything works. But when you leave, you take your card, everything shuts down. So it really does.
Which can be very frustrating if you can't find the card at the bottom.
You're in trouble. Yes, you are.
But fumbling in the dark.
It
No,
is
but it's
true
good efficiency.
that part of the problem, if it was an older structure in New York, sometimes they don't want to spend the money to get to the wiring and things they need to put the control in. Technology, you're seeing more and more wireless and other capabilities thanks to the Switch and other communications providers that we can overcome. So the thing I always look at is how technology really has made a huge difference over the years in many areas, but in efficiency in particular. And, miniaturization is going to continue, but packing more into a smaller unit that consumes less energy. I don't think that is going to change.
No, and we see, we see, Moore's law is still basically valid, and that's a law that says that, complexity of these little chips increases tremendously. So you can pack more and more of these chips. So we will see that moving forward in terms of technology. But I think you alluded to a point which I believe is extremely important in the whole debate of energy efficiency, that is us, the person, the people, and behaviors, right? Because I love your example of the hotel room, but I complain the guy or the girl coming after you and say, Dan, the fridge doesn't work.
Exactly.
Or coming into your Chinese hotel room and say, well, the air conditioning is not on because your car is not on. So we need somehow to explain to people at large what energy efficiency means for them, but also for society, for the planet as a whole, because it's a whole societal problem, right? So, and I think with cars, people kind of get it because, they have to go to the gas station and they pump and they say, oh my goodness, already again to the gas station. Was for a lot of other stuff, it's hidden.
Yeah.
And that makes it so difficult because if I talk to my parents about, these cell towers, that's X watt. What? Because they don't know what it is.
Right.
Well, it's the gas station, they know and they understand it. So I think there is a lot of effort for us to do from a communications point of view, behavior point of view, before we get there. The technology is there.
Absolutely.
I heard you this morning say that the technology is there.
Sure.
So what do we need?
But I can give you an example of what you're pointing at, because I agree with the utility bill in most countries. A lot of people don't really see it, right? No. At least you don't see it hour by hour. So it's not like when you have a fuel car. But actually, one great example of the technology is an app I have on my telephone. It gives me hour by hour monitoring of my electricity consumption and my heating consumption. Yeah. And when I got the app, which is free of charge from my utility, I cut my consumption in half.
Really?
And the only reason why I did it was because I looked at it, and then of course, you think about it for 2 minutes, you think what's interesting to watch is how much energy do I burn at night? Because we have 5 people in our household and a dog, and hopefully the dog doesn't burn
The dog's obviously got the television on, and
but the 5 people have 5 iPhones, 5 iPads, 5 computers, and all kinds of, I don't know how many TV sets. So I said, okay, what's happening during nighttime? I was actually burning a lot of kilowatt hours. And I said, there's something wrong here. But what's wrong, it's also pretty obvious. It's the freezer, it's the refrigerator. So it's also fine. I say, fine, I'll change them. If I went out the next day, did that. And now I don't use any electricity to anymore. Perfectly fine. Then I looked at the other things in my household, the lighting and so on, and I cut it down in half. But because it was in my face, so I got the information. You said, now I can see this, the money. It's the cents, it's the dollars, it's the euros.
That's the way we feel it, right?
Every single hour while I'm sleeping, and no way on earth I'm gonna pay money to the utility while I'm just sleeping.
That raises an interesting point.
So, but the information gave me.
You're freeing up all that generation by being more efficient. But as we talk about level loading and the ability to then use the generating power that's freed up because of nighttime.
Yeah.
One of the big things I tell some of the young people I work with, if you really want to be wealthy, create a storage mechanism for off-peak power storage. I mean, that to me is, we have enormous investments in generating capacity, but obviously at nighttime, everybody's power consumption will go down. If we could just level load that so we don't have the peaks, you can reduce pollution, because obviously if I'm not going to generate a peak, that means more CO2. So those are the kind of things that we change behaviors, but then people will complain because the utility, at least here in the US, would say, I'm not getting as much revenue, so my rates have to go up to cover the capital costs, because they built a plant that had a 30-year life. It's a dilemma in that sense.
Yeah,
So
you're
can
right.
I just interrupt you all, because I think we've got to a great point here where we've examined lots and lots of issues, but I think people watching might like to know where it's going well. So a bit of a feeling of hope here. I mean, I think, look at the sectors that we cover there. They're between us and you and everything, you notice, huge. I mean, can you each point to something where, a small thing, a big thing where you've seen it work? I thought your example of an app is very interesting. What about you, Chair? Have you seen?
Yeah, well, actually,
a development
with
inspired?
Green Touch, we've been developing quite a few new technologies that reduce energy consumption. And cell towers, when you drive on the highway, you see these big towers with all the antenna on top of it. Well, we have new architectures which go to what we call small cells. So instead of a large coverage by that one big tower, it's multiple smaller cells which are actually sleeping like your nightingale, sleeping when there is nobody, because they shouldn't do anything. But when somebody is passing through that area, they wake up, they provide full service and even better service. And when you go out of that cell coverage, then they go back to sleep. So that's an enormous improvement in energy efficiency.
And where are they happening right now?
Oh, well, these type of technologies start to get implemented in various places, but for most and all, especially in urban environments, because there you have a very high concentration of people and density.
But so I didn't mention that the information that you get, the app, and then I think the combination of IT technology with the smart energy system, with which and so on. So again, I cut my kilowatt hours in half. But the same for the heating. So if you're in the United States, you could buy a Google Nest.
Right.
Yes,
And then of course,
that.
and if you're outside the United States, you would want to buy a Danfoss living. It's basically the same functionality. But what it is basically is you have a different temperature when you're not at home. You have a different comfort temperature you want when you're at home, if you're traveling. But also, you land at the airport and you take off here and you could control the heating and say, fine, I'm home in half an hour, just start heating up the house, cool it down, whatever. That's an enormous benefit. And on average, you would save 25% on your heating bill. But at the same time, you get much better functionalities and you control it in the app and so on. So, I mean, there's no downside whatsoever to that. It's way more efficient, it's way more convenient, and of course, it appeals to a lot of people who use anyway some kind of smart device to control their lives. So I think that's going extremely well. Then you can ask what's the market penetration.
What's the market penetration?
It's 2%. So you could of course say, yeah, but that's not a lot. No, but it just means that there's an enormous market in front of us when people start picking up these technologies.
And that's really tough, because we tend to say that the developed world has achieved a very high level of efficiency, but then you do look around and you realize there's still enormous opportunity in the developed world. We focus a lot on the developing world because of, one, the fact that so many people have no access to it, first and foremost, and so they're going to want access, and obviously they should. But there's still huge potential, I think, in terms of efficiency that developed and developing. But, I mean, there's always a but. It's not going to happen without some degree of regulatory push. I mean, we've worked many, many years to get the minimum energy performance standards, and I can tell you, anytime we've advocated for those, there's always another side kind of pushing back on that as well, because it generally means that the appliances, the refrigerators, the air conditioners are more expensive by nature. So there has to be some financing mechanism. I know there have been panels on this to help those countries set a standard that's higher than the lowest level, if you will, even though the energy consumption is higher.
Yeah.
That to me is one of the conundrums we have, is how do we, when these countries are moving into the kind of developed or developing, to get the standard higher. That is a real challenge.
I mean, I think capacity building lies at the heart of a lot of this, doesn't it? So we need to share our lessons learned and help other people to avoid going up the same learning curve. I mean, again, I come back to cars, but that dependency on petrol, that kind of addiction to petrol, is not advisable for any country. As I said before, energy security. These fuels are coming from some of the most unstable parts of the world and so on. And so I think we need to share, and that's something we do within the work we do in something called the Global Fuel Economy Initiative, which is very much a partnership of world experts. We go into countries, and my foundation funds this work. And it's exactly the point you make. We know it's an astounding thing that the International Energy Agency said recently, that there will be $400 trillion spent on vehicles and fuels between now and 2050. That is a phenomenal sum of money. It's a phenomenal market, as you just described the market you were talking about. So the opportunities to shape that are, the potential to be going from shaping that are huge. And I think regulation is really important. That's something we've seen makes a difference. What do you think could help make a difference?
But I also think that I think that across anything we do, I think things are moving in the right direction, and I think you see improvement across the problem we have, of course, is that, let's say on average, the ballpark figure, that we improve everything 1% per year, but the global growth is 2%. The population growth is much higher than that. So that, of course, is that we continue to improve everything, but of course we are outpaced by the number of more people coming into the middle class, more people across the globe. So that's, of course, why we need to accelerate all the things we do in the efficiency and moving forward. We now need to sort of, get up to speed, so to say. I think that's important, and I think that's where the policies, the standards, the building codes, all of that is the best way for China, for India, for Indonesia, for Mexico, for Colombia to leapfrog into new technology. And then I think one thing is also pretty important is that don't reinvent the wheel.
Yes.
A lot of countries that I visit across the globe now have adopted LEED certificates for buildings and so on. I think that's super nice because it works well in the United States. Now we use it in India as well. I mean, let's not make things complicated. China copied, pasted a lot of the European legislation on the mileage and so on.
Yeah.
That's fine. That makes the world more efficient, more rational, that the auto manufacturers would know that it might not be completely the same, but it's more or less the same things that you need to comply with across these countries. And that also, I think, will give a faster uptake of the best technologies, that not 193 countries have 193 different sets of codecs and so on, because that's only going to limit trade, that's only going to limit the sort of adaptation of best available technology.
Well, I think to your point, that's an excellent idea, because if I'm a manufacturer, if I'm a Whirlpool or a Bosch or someone like that, what I want is greater standardization, because I'm going to manufacture a product and ship it to multiple countries. If you have 93 different standards set, it becomes almost impossible to make the cost much higher. Back with the energy efficient partnership we're working with, we're advocating really setting regional minimum standards so that we could then make it simpler for the upstream manufacturer. Because we said this is a public-private partnership. You can't just look at from the regulatory standpoint. You've got to look at the industrial side and say, what can we do to make this as seamless as possible and make it work? And that's establishing regional standards. Now, with China and India, you have two enormous countries that have a bit of a ways to go. So it is good to see if they set standards, it becomes almost a de facto standard for all of Asia in many respects. And you're right, they look at Europe and Japan and the US as a guide to help them to do that. We focused in China, just the one example, on motors and motor systems, because there's such a substantial user of electricity. We found the installed motor base in China is essentially using the technical IE1, which is the minimum level. And part of the problem is that the motor life can be quite expensive, 8, 10, 12 years, depending on its application. But they get refurbished because the frame and all this can be reused, particularly in China. But the problem was going from the old motor and reworking it, they still kept the efficiency level the same. We developed a technology, a solid copper rotor, that doesn't take any skill to swap it out versus a rewind. And it can take it immediately from the level 1 efficiency to level 2. Something as simple as that has a huge impact on energy efficiency in China. So we've had great success with that.
Yeah, so I cannot but agree on standardization regulation. And if I look at what we do in research, I think essential there is to have a good presence of the stakeholdership globally. So it's not only us, the US companies, or us, the European companies, but be total encompassing, and in research we have representatives from various companies, also from China and alike, operators, manufacturers. So if you have all of them included, then you can go to these world standards instead of the country or regional.
They are phenomenally slow processes, though. I think the one that applies to cars is through WP29, a group that meets in Geneva, and they set themselves, targets to develop new agreed approaches, which are 15, 20 years. And when you're looking just at climate alone, either side, all those resources that can be better used elsewhere, that's a long time. And also there is an issue about engagement. I think you're right. And I think the private sector does need to engage proactively. There can be a feeling that it's all slowed down by representative organisations who, clearly want to sort of, manage the process to their time scale. So proactive stakeholder engagement is probably right. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we worked in Europe on the regulatory process in Europe to get transformers efficiency upgraded. And it took 8 years. And it's a process where there's various committees that meet and describe, and you have to take public input. And literally it took 8 years for the new standard was mandated on something that on the surface would be almost obvious to all of us. That's one of the big areas of waste. And you mentioned it earlier, Fleming. We know in China, the China National Institute Standards knows they lose 7% of the electricity they generate because of substandard transformers. I mean, they can cut that in half very easily. It's just a process of education. It's 7% of generation. I think there's I might have the number 6 billion megawatts of generating right today. I think that may be the wrong number, but it's enormous. So 7% of that. It's multiple power plants because of something that could be resolved. So there's a lot of ways to attack energy efficiency that are what I consider very low hanging fruit. Part of it is you mentioned capacity building and education. We spend a lot of time educating regulatory officials as well about the opportunities they have in their own countries on things like that. So
but I think that what you say, when you see some of this, let's say, inefficient technologies, you mentioned China, go from the other countries, I think part of it is also that there's some kind of misalignment of the incentives, because for somebody, it's probably, they feel somehow that now I need to buy something that's very cheap. Right? Okay, but the total cost of the ownership will actually increase, right? Because every day that goes by, you pay more and more and more, right? So I think that's also
buried in the maintenance budget.
We need to fix the economics about this, because again, it's
life cycle.
For a lot of these things that you have to pay upfront, a little bit more upfront, but then from day one you save a lot of money. And so I think there we can work on that. And I think also on the incentive, we look at the buildings. It's a big issue because somebody designed the building, somebody built it, somebody else owned it, and maybe the fourth or fifth entity actually live in the building and would then have to carry the cost of the energy. But those who build it, or those who own it, who designed it, they don't care maybe for the energy consumption, because again, it's somebody else who actually carries the energy bill down the road. And that's sort of split incentives that if we could fix that, then I think everybody would have a higher motivation to be concerned about becoming more efficient.
Yeah, but that's the key, is the holistic approach. Whether it's getting all the stakeholders, whether it's getting all the value chain players, I think you have to have them from the start all around the table and work with. It's not like we used to do in the older times, even before I was there. It's like you just manufacture and then you try to sell, and then you see you come to a problem, and then you start to get standards and things working. No, it's tackle all of these elements. the same time, get all of the people involved, and then you will get somewhere.
Very hard to do, though. I mean, that,
No.
your point about capacity building.
Yeah,
it's
but
worth
you have to.
it.
You have to.
I agree. It's
Because
essential.
it's a bit like you would almost have in big corporations and not invented years in Germany. It's like if I make something and I hand it over to you, it's like, cool, I can
It's
make
the
it better.
wrong-shaped hole for a thing that needs to go in.
So I'd rather have everybody around the table, discuss it, then everybody does his little piece, or her little piece, and go for it.
The work we do on vehicles in country is exactly that. So when we it's a cooperative process, which I won't go into detail on, except to say that when we go to countries with these expert groups that we work with, we start from the basis of sharing an understanding of what the situation is with all of the relevant stakeholders. And so when it comes to vehicles, you'd be amazed how many countries, well, of course, no registration systems, very poor data. Data is central to this. Don't even fully understand what their existing fleet looks like, fleet of vehicles, I mean. Never mind how they look in the future. So getting people around the table to understand that, I think, is absolutely key.
I wanted to give maybe another example that also shows the complexity, but also shows, some of the things that can be achieved. That is Apple. Of course, the big thing for Apple now is the data centers that will fuel the iCloud, the iTunes, whatever you have, right? And they decided to place one or two that they were built in Europe, in Denmark. And there's many really good reasons for that. One is that there's a super efficient grid with no downtime whatsoever. That, of course, is really important. The grid is up and running always. There's a lot of wind capacity, so Apple would like to have a renewable source. So that's also important. But a third component, which I think is equally important, is that the data centers needs a lot of cooling. Right. And the other side of the cooling is that there's a lot of excess heat. And what you can do in Denmark is actually you can sell that excess heat to a local district heating company. So all of a sudden, all of that heat that in the old days would just go out to thin air, now actually they have an economic value to Apple. They can sell the heat to a district heating company. They can really use it to heat a lot of the houses in the neighboring and stuff like that. So I think that's a clever way to think about also that everywhere we have a lot of energy waste, we have a lot of surplus energy places. If we get to think about being more creative, what can we do with technology, but also again the alignment of the incentives and so on. I think that there's a lot that can be done, and a lot of good people do the same thing with the supermarkets. Because we all would know that for our own household, that on the back side of the refrigerator it's really hot. It's not being used, but in the supermarket people utilize that for the hot water and then so on, and then save a lot of money. That's not rocket science. It's actually pretty simple from a technology point of view, but you need to get the idea, and then you need to have an incentive to save on. Right?
Do a lot of work in our technology group on thermal energy storage and transfers, because it's basically found money if we can capture it, develop systems for that we can then turn over to the marketplace. We do the technology research mainly through universities and manage it, but the idea is, just as you said, you think, Tesco or Walmart or place, you go in there and you realize how much freezing and refrigeration and that heat is just basically being vented into the air. Sure. It has value if it can be captured. Part of it is, as we maybe see our renewable power sources grow and we have the mini grids, it becomes a bit easier for those versus what we have today in the large transmission grids, because those are all based on huge scale and large transmission lines, and so they don't lend themselves as easily to the things we're talking about.
But I had a question for you.
Oh,
if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's because now we talk about incentives and we talk about money. And I think that's interesting to see, is there a correlation between cost, upfront cost, lifetime, and then people's behavior and what they want to buy from that? And I think again, automotive is an interesting case, because I live in Northern Europe, so I live in Denmark, I live next to Germany, and I think in terms of what I get out of it, because of the transportation, I think the energy is still pretty cheap, but if I ask an American colleague, because we pay double of what we pay in the United States, that's insane. With people in Denmark and Germany pay that much, and of course when I'm in Abu Dhabi, we pay 4 times more per liter per gallon, and people in Abu Dhabi say, "Are you insane? You pay that much per liter per gallon?" But how do you see? Because in automotive, you probably have much more data on. So would then people in countries like Germany, Denmark, be more to buying energy efficient, the behavior compared to the Americans, compared to people in the Middle East where energy is highly subsidized and so on?
Those things all must play a part. They absolutely obviously play a part. I think vehicles are extraordinarily interesting things. I think when people get into their car, they say something about themselves, and there is a very skilled world of advertising around vehicles, which associates the vehicle with so very much more value than very many other things really do. I think your fridge doesn't, and with the greatest of respect. And I think maybe your phone does, but everyone now has an iPhone or the very latest thing. It's so much more accessible. Yes, indeed. So I think there's something really interesting about the way in which a vehicle is a lifestyle choice as well as many other things. On the specifics of savings, there's a whole theory about whether if you save, about whether everyone ever looks ahead to the saving, and also whether when they do, they are able to take that into account when they discount the price. And then also whether if it is actually more efficient to drive, they drive more. So it's called the rebound effect. But all of those things said and done, there are an awful lot of countries which have a much more fuel efficient fleet because they have policies in place. And I think that's kind of what interests me in all of this. What is it about energy efficiency which doesn't spark a light in a politician's eye and make them think this is the solution? This is free money. I think you found money, you described it as. You told us all about the heat behind the fridge, which is free heating for hospital.
Sure.
You have these great ideas of masts which go to sleep and wake up when you walk past them, which is an extraordinary idea. So it's what is it that will light up the eyes of a politician about energy efficiency? I think it would also be worth trying to unlock. And certainly when it comes to the work we do, I think it is the fact that for minimal cost, for cost-effective technology which exists currently, so we're not talking about billions of pounds in new untested techs with all of those potential downsides, you can make the most phenomenal savings. And I think our conversation today has probably identified, several elements to where that whole thing needs to go to get our low-hanging fruit off the tree. Was it you today who said it's just not right? Someone said that. Actually, it was the person sat next to you on our panel, wasn't it? It's maybe low-hanging, but it's not right. So it's not falling off. And I think regulation, we all agree, is part of it. And we need to have all stakeholders involved. We need to look at the market potential. So there are many different elements to how we might be able to unlock the free money that we're all there.
We said megawatts. We want megawatts.
Megawatts,
Great way
that's probably
to generate the efficiency.
Yeah, a good way of thinking about it.
It's essentially free. It can be free, and that's the thing that you can see where the opportunity is for all of us.
Absolutely, and I think when you're looking at countries that are struggling to provide public services and need the money that could be redirected through various means away from being thrown away in wasted energy towards a hospital or a school or one of the development imperatives that they also face, then it all becomes very real.
But I think, I think the motivations will differ quite a bit from country to country because we've seen it here in the United States. The uptake of let's say big, not so efficient cars also varies a little bit with the price of gasoline and so on. And there's a different agenda in the United States now because of the shale revolution and so on. In Europe now is a very different agenda because of the situation with Ukraine and Russia and so on. Got a different thinking in Brussels and so on. In China, my experience in China is that they're deeply concerned about local air pollution. Yeah. So I think that's driving things, dramatically in the right direction in China because of local air pollution.
Real deaths, people dying.
But and I think again, what isn't obvious even to a lot of politicians and mayors, ministers, and so on is that one example in northeast China with a medium-sized city that we work with, they can save $100 million every year. But today, of course, they pay it. It's in the budget. Nobody thought about it. But now the mayors see, wow, I save $100 million every year. Like that's money I could send into schools, better schools. I could spend the money on better healthcare. I can maybe strengthen our infrastructure. There's a lot of money that's tied up in inefficient energy systems that could be spent elsewhere. In other countries, you could actually send the money back to the taxpayers. There's many things you can do, and that I think is perfectly up to the country. But it's not very rational every day just to burn a lot of cash on inefficient ways and behaviors. And as we said to begin with, I think the good news for everybody is that we don't want anybody to compromise on their lifestyle.
Right.
And we can actually have both. And
It doesn't have to be
become more
zero
efficient.
sum. I think, as your point, it pays to be energy efficient. It really does pay.
I mean, I think it's really important we don't get too carried away. And we acknowledge that an awful lot, I mean, I certainly feel my contribution is distinct. My contribution, the contribution of the work we do, is very distinct, it's very clear, it's very focused, it's part of a very big picture. And of course, as you said, when we first began talking about this a few moments ago, look at the alternative technologies like electric vehicles, and some work we had done in our initiative not long ago, identifying $2 trillion in net savings by 2025, which is a lot of resource, just from cost-effective vehicle fuel efficiency technologies. And that would pay 4 times over for the maximum amount of subsidy investment in electric vehicles globally. So use it to pay for better forms of doing the same thing. So
It's a free growth package for
Yeah.
any government. We want to stimulate the economy.
absolutely, because it's resource that's already in place. So I think that's probably, you know, the conclusion that we would reach is that it's all there to be taken.
Absolutely.
We all have to work together to get to it. I do think the Sustainable Energy for Initiative is really throwing a light onto it, and it's an absolutely right focus. And it's amazing to be here in New York this week and see so many people who clearly, they're here for different reasons, renewable energy and other issues, but the panels on efficiency have been quite impressive. So,
Thank you.
a very positive agenda, we hope.
Good.
Thank you all very much
Thank
for taking
you.
part.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.